Good afternoon, everybody. Is this working? The worst thing that any chairman has to do is to introduce a speaker who's so much more famous than he is. So I will not waste my time, as I told Tom, telling a long story about him. I'll give you the briefest of details about him that you should know. And then after I explain what we can try to achieve in the 1 hour that we have here with us. Just in case some of you haven't done your research, he's a boy from Minnesota, educated at Brandeis University, has been a New York Times correspondent since 1981, won the Pulitzer Prize several times. He became the New York Times Foreign Affairs columnist in 1995. He's the author of 4 books, all of which are bestsellers, including the current one, The World is Flat. And on that, let me say that we agreed that Tom will not speak about The World is Flat at lunch today, since he's going to be speaking to a huge audience that we're going to have later today. So instead, since one of his main focus of his visit this time is to, in a sense, look at Asia and America's relations with Asia, this is what he will discuss with you in this session today. He'll make some remarks and then open up to some questions. Now, I strongly encourage all of you, because I do know Tom very well, that he would like you to be very open and very frank and give him genuinely what you think. He's quite used to hard questioning. He's taken a lot of it. And I guarantee you that he will give you an equally hard response, so don't worry. But he's at his best when he's challenged. He's at his best when you say to him, no, I disagree with you, and this is why your point of view of the world is wrong, and why my point of view is right. So he would like to be challenged, because in a sense he is also, given the nature of his job, on a great learning mission. He wants to hear and find out not the things that you would say politely in public. He wants to know the things that you would say in private among yourselves. You know, when you're having a private conversations and you're talking among yourself and you say, well, you know, this guy Bush or this guy, you know, Hu Jintao, whatever it is. Whatever you say, anything in private, say it now. This is a closed door event, so you can be very candid and feel free to have a very good, robust dialogue with Tom. And I can assure you that the more open you are, the more you will get from Tom. And with that, Tom, over to you.
Great,
I'm sorry we can't move you around because they want to film you. So
okay, I'll just sit here
and I'll open the scope for you.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you, Kishore, for having me and bringing this gathering together. As Kishore said, I'm going to be talking about The World is Flat at my talk tonight. I know some of you have read the book. Those of you who haven't, I know who you are and I know where you live. Okay, so but we'll leave that for later. So I kind of have some of my own questions, but I thought maybe I'd give you a chance to, if there's anything that you wanted to start with, and maybe then I'd play a little off that. I've been in Tokyo for the last few days. I was there giving a talk for Asahi Shimbun, and then I'm here in Singapore, and then going home for a couple of weeks, then actually going to Iraq. So that's my near-term travel schedule. And so the floor is open, and happy to really go anywhere that you'd like.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
Your microphone?
Oh.
Whatever.
That's okay. Now, anyway, you're here to listen to Tom. So, who would like to begin by asking a question, or give a sense of what you would like Tom to focus on?
Can go anywhere that anyone wants. Please. Is that a hand up, or are you just resting with the wall?
Yes. Go ahead, Gopi. Just if you don't mind, each one of you can introduce yourself.
Please, yeah, I'd like to know.
Tell Tom
where you're from,
your country you're from, a bit of a background.
Yeah.
Then he'll. Yeah, you come to the mic, Gopi. Yeah. They want to catch you.
My name is Gopi Ratnaraj. I'm a new faculty at this school. I'm a graduate of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. My question is, I was really appalled to see the response of the U.S. government to the recent disaster for the Katrina hurricane. And since I've lived there for 7 years, I didn't see the spontaneity which we saw after 9/11 for the response for the hurricane. what do you see the reason behind this difference?
Yeah, that's, it's one of the questions I really wanted to ask you, and and I'm glad you raised that, first. I think at one level, to give them their due, as it were, the level of the sheer just sort of magnitude of the disaster, an entire urban area of 1.5 million people totally flooded, was simply, even if you had planned for it, if you said, here's what could happen, here's the response we have to have in place, I think that just the sheer magnitude overwhelmed them. And the cell phone, the wireless system was knocked out, the internet was knocked out, there was a complete breakdown. That's to give them their due, But at the same time, I think it was a failure, obviously, at every single level, starting from the local response. The local forces seem to have been overwhelmed. The state forces seem to have been overwhelmed. And the federal government was overwhelmed. And I think what you're going to see, and what you're already seeing in the debate in America, is why. What are the reasons, for that? What was going on that had people so distracted? And, my own take is that, this is an administration that really, in many ways, has denigrated government. This is a president who got elected by saying it's not the government's money, it's your money. Well, I mean, it's not the government's hurricane, it's your hurricane. And this is when you really need government. We have an administration whose tax policy was set by a man named Grover Norquist, whose abiding philosophy is that he wants to shrink government in America down so it's small enough so he said he could drag it into the bathtub and drown it in his bathtub. And to which I actually wrote a column on Wednesday saying, I would never say this about anyone else, but I really hope Grover Norquist owned property at the foot of the levee in New Orleans, and that when it broke, he was busy drowning government in the bathtub when he needed to be evacuated by a National Guard helicopter. So, a lot of misplaced priorities were at work here, I think. The president, I was thinking about this, one thing I know about Singapore is that it takes governance seriously enough that it pays senior government officials at salaries competitive with the private sector. And we had, at the head of our emergency relief system, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, a man who was a crony of the president. And evidently his two deputies were cronies of the president. His one qualification for the job seems to have been that he was a college pal of George Bush. And he had already, his last job was head of, you couldn't make this up, the Arabian Horse Association or something in the United States. And he evidently was eased out of that job for incompetence. So to have someone like that in charge of possibly the worst national disaster in our modern history is really just asking for trouble. So it seems to me all of these things, kind of came together in a perfect storm. It was both the storm and the response. And what the implications of this will be in the long term, I don't know, but this is a profound event. But let me turn that question on you, because one of the things I was curious about is how it kind of looked from out here. But in this sense, people like to make fun of America, and we're sort of a big dumb elephant in a lot of ways. And people that say, we're often, the subject of criticism and contempt and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I've always felt that people really want there to be a strong America out there, that you can count on in a crunch. And I'm wondering if watching the scenes unfolding in New Orleans makes people here say, wow, we're really home alone. We always thought at least America could, we can understand when there's a flood, somewhere in the third world and they're not going to get it right, but when America can't even get it right. Kind of what does that mean? I'm just sort of curious how it makes you feel, someone who's lived in America or anybody else. Whether am I projecting a feeling onto people here that isn't there, or is it something that really does kind of rattle people in a certain way? So I want to put that on the floor.
Anybody wants to respond to that?
Please.
Please come to the mic.
Go to the
please.
microphone.
And just say where you're from.
I'm Fauzia Nasri Sultan. I'm from Bangladesh. I'm the MPP. I think that is the problem with America is that America is basically a pro-war country. I think I believe that way because from if you just think the 19th century or 20th century, you'll find that in the Second World War, how even this Bob Carr also mentioning that if Roosevelt how he involved with the war, and then if you saw the Vietnam War, that American governments they like war. They don't think how their economic going on, how they capable of maintaining this disaster. They're emphasizing on more on war. That is why they fail to. War means that is arms war, this kind of, not war against the weather or anything else. That's why I think America now facing this kind of problem. Otherwise, you think that you saw that in Bangladesh, we are every year we have cyclone, and we are just a third world country. But we are every year we can face our problems by ourselves also. So we don't deserve this kinds of problem that America face this way. That's why I think that's.
You think you've learned how to handle a crisis like this in Bangladesh and that we haven't?
No, we're handling the crisis. Every year we have some kinds of natural disaster, like flood and even cyclone. You know that in 1991, that cyclone, that is the weather come by the land by 235 kilometers per hour. So it is a huge one. We lost 1 lakh people that time. But after 1 year, we survive. We need one year. But I think that America should still already we passed 1 week. American people passed 1 week. But still they are facing problem. Yesterday the governor give pressure people to evacuate the New Orleans. So that is after one week, they should evacuate before our 1 week. So it is, I think.
And you think the problem is that we're just a country that likes to fight wars?
Wars, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. You know, if one looks at the history of America around World War I and World War II, we basically had to be dragged into those wars. We didn't exactly, eagerly, sign up, let alone were the powers that initiated them. We had to be dragged into World War I. We had to be dragged into World War II by our allies. I mean that when those wars started, we did not want to take part. It was the isolationist strain in America that really defined our politics. I'd urge you to go read that history. Most Americans at the start of World War I and II did not want to take part. We had to be dragged in because basically a squabbling Europe, couldn't solve its own problems, and there were a lot of Americans who, at the time, didn't believe we should get involved, and so I think it's actually a grotesque exaggeration to suggest that we're a country that likes war.
People, I'm not saying that people.
Yeah.
Government.
Yeah. Well, again, I wouldn't, yeah, the situation, surrounding the war in Iraq, is a very peculiar situation that flowed out of 9/11. And anyone who studied the politics of America in the last year or so, since 9/11 knows there was a huge debate about whether to go to war after 9/11. But let's keep in mind that the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, or the war in the military response of the United States, it was because of 9/11. We were the ones who were attacked. Now, you can disagree with how we've responded, whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing, but I could turn that on you. I could turn that on you and say that you love fascist governments too much. Because I could tell you that tolerating a fascist regime in Iraq that was killing hundreds of thousands of its own people, that's something you love. Now, you would be shocked by that. You would be offended by that. You would say, well, how can you say that? How can you say that Bangladeshis love fascist governments? But that's as ridiculous a statement as saying to me that America likes war.
Okay. Come, please. Come to the mic, please. You can see he likes a strong debate. So I hope you'll be robust. Huh? This is your chance.
I'm Kamran Rahman, and I'm a student from Pakistan.
Okay.
I would just give you an example of my country, the recent developments of Pakistan having relationship or starting its relationship with Israel.
Yes.
But I want to have it in the context of the crusade of Bush against whatever war he's having.
Please.
And just to ask you, how do you see that? Is it on the pretext of American pressure that Musharraf is having this dialogue, or it's some ulterior motive, the more division of the Muslim world?
That's an interesting question, and I haven't studied it closely, but I would suggest something else to you, Carmen, that there may be totally internally Pakistani realpolitik reasons for it. That may be that Pakistan is observing the growth in the Israel-India relationship and understanding that that is an axis that has within it important and potentially significant political and economic power advantages for India. And that Pakistan, for purely its own internal reasons, understood that it needed to and had an interest in balancing the India-Israel axis with a Pakistan-Israel relationship of its own, one that would involve trade and maybe military exchanges in the future, and also potential diplomatic advantages. So as far as I know, I mean, if you came to me tomorrow and said, I have the secret protocol that was signed by the State Department telling Pakistan it should open relations with Israel, that would be a good thing. It would help Pakistan and America. I'd believe, I'd perfectly believe it, that somebody may have whispered in somebody's ear, hey, psst, this might be a good idea. But what I'm suggesting to you that there may be purely domestic, internal Pakistani reasons, given its own geopolitical context, that actually encourage it to have those relations. Please, follow.
The opposition, as you see, being a Muslim country,
yes,
and the Zionist movement or whatever, because of the Palestine problem.
Sure.
Probably the reaction it is evoking is much more than the advantages which we'll be having.
Right.
Just because of this building up of relationship.
Sure. And then that may be a price that, excuse me, just tickling my throat, that Musharraf has to pay. But if I guess the question I would ask someone in Pakistan who's opposing it, why, if the Palestinians can have relations with Israel, the Palestinian Authority has direct relationship with the Israeli government, why, if the Jordanian government can have a peace treaty and trade with Israel, why, if the Egyptian government can have a peace treaty and trade with Israel, why is Pakistan holier than thou? Pardon? It has a bomb? But that could be, but that and 10 cents will get you a cup of coffee, okay? Because that bomb, is a bomb you can't use. Israel doesn't threaten Pakistan. The only thing Israel is interested in Pakistan right now, I'm going to be really blunt with you, is flying over it to get to India, where it can do trade and development. And that's the only thing Israel's interested in Pakistan right now, flying over it. And Israel has absolutely no strategic doctrine vis-a-vis Pakistan. So, I think there are internal Pakistani reasons for this that have to do with the balance of power in South Asia between Israel and Pakistan. And again,
within India and Pakistan.
India and Pakistan, yeah. And again, I don't doubt for a second that someone in Washington may have suggested this, But Pakistan's standing in America right now is hardly low. I mean, Musharraf's standing in the United States is relatively, it isn't like, I have to tell you, someone who follows this story, I was shocked. I was completely surprised. I had no idea this was in the works. It's not like people have been saying, boy, you know what Pakistan really needs is a photo op with Israel, and that'll cure all its problems. A, it had no problems, and B, no one saw this as the solution. So it's precisely because it took me by surprise that I looked for internal, regional reasons for this. And, you know, I think that that's, you know, Israel has relations with Morocco. It has trade relations with several Gulf states. It has diplomatic relations, you know, with Turkey. It's a Muslim country. Are you any more Muslim than Turkey? Turkey doesn't have a bomb.
No, come to the mic. They want to film you too. They want you on camera.
I just want to go back to your previous question.
Please. Where are you from? Could you introduce yourself?
You are supporting the
Could you introduce yourself?
Iraq.
Sorry, which country? Is that in which
I am from Bangladesh. My name is
Okay.
Inamul Habib, and I am studying here in MPP course. You are supporting the war on Iraq.
Yeah.
But is it right to make war against millions of people just to oust a fascist government? Do you believe, is it right? But you are killing lots of people there. But is North Korea is more fascist government, but U.S. is not interested to overthrow them?
Right. Well,
My question.
you know, it's certainly a legitimate, certainly a legitimate question. But you know, I think that when we talk about these things, we really have to be careful about our language, okay? And we really have to be precise, because I think there are lots of reasons to oppose, you know, the Iraq War. Okay, so I think that's, let me grant that, you know, from the very beginning. A lot of Americans opposed it. So I can certainly understand why someone from the Muslim world, you know, would oppose it as well. But let's talk precisely about things. We have not killed millions of people in Iraq, okay? Okay. Pardon?
People are killing in Samara, people are killing in Basra, just to oust the Saddam government.
Right.
You have lots of people, innocent people are killing there.
I'm
How
sure
you can
that,
judge?
yeah,
How can you can
I'm
judge?
sure that you know, many innocent people have been killed, but let's get our sort of just this all in the right proportion, okay? We have not killed millions of people in Iraq, okay? That is a gross exaggeration. So let's start there. Let's start with the facts. The second, have you been to Iraq since the war?
I have not in Iraq, but
Okay, well, great.
I
Let's
have
start.
read more about Robert Fisk writing from
Right.
England.
Right, okay. Well, I've been to Iraq also, okay, as has Robert Fisk, okay?
I feel that you are not that much sympathized to the Iraqis.
Pardon me?
Like Robert Fisk, you are not that much sympathized to the Iraqi people of the suffering.
Oh, well, if sympathy for the Iraqi people is saying that we should have kept a murderous government in power that killed, and this isn't an exaggeration, hundreds of thousands of its own people, and Amnesty International, an independent body, can give you the facts from the mass grave. If supporting tacitly that government makes me an enemy of the Iraqi people, then count me an enemy of the Iraqi people. Okay? So who is a friend and who is an enemy of the Iraqi people, my friend? That's a highly debatable question. And whether supporting tacitly an Iraqi government that was killing its own people makes you a friend of the Iraqi people? Sorry, not in my book, all right? Now, how do you make sense of the process going on in Iraq? Are all these people just quislings and collaborators? These Shiites, these Druze, these Kurds, these Sunnis, who are writing their own constitution for the first time, who are getting a chance to forge their own social contract thanks to what we've done? Are they all just quislings and collaborators for you and Bob Fisk? That the real authentic people are who? The Baathists? Are they the real authentic people? So this is a complicated story. Let's let the Iraqis speak for themselves. There was the first free and fair election ever held in Iraq, okay? 80% of the people, Shiites and the Kurds of that country to begin with, participated in that election. 8 million people came out and voted. Do your views trump that? Do Bob Fisk's views trump that? That's a reality too. The only millions we can speak about in Iraq, for sure, are those who voted for the first time in their history. I want to be on the side of those people. Of course the price is huge. The price of the status quo is huge. What do you think, the status quo is benign?
It's a very huge price giving them, because the whole civilization has been destroyed by
The whole civilization has not been destroyed, and it has not been destroyed by Israel. If you want to talk seriously, okay, you've got to use a language that is accurate to the facts, all right?
I think you've got a good idea of how strong the argument can be. Now, you're going to have 1, 2, and then 3. Please come forward, identify yourselves.
I am Shilpi Banerjee. I'm from New Delhi, India. Thank you so much for this engaging talk. It's taking a very interesting turn. Once again, I have a question for you regarding the US's role in Afghanistan and Iraq. Yesterday we saw a very interesting movie on what happened with the American youth during the Vietnam War. And frankly speaking, I really didn't know that hippie movement and all that started, as a reaction to the Vietnam War, I have a question here that what does youth in America feel? I have never been to US, right? I am part of the young generation, if you can call me.
Yes.
I'm a little interested in knowing what do the youth in US feel, and is it like some kind of a movement like this can again start off in America? I mean, if they are against the movements. Thank you.
Very important question. Very hard to summarize, because one of the most interesting things, about the youth movement in America, say in the last 2 years surrounding Iraq, is that there's been no anti-war movement. Now, there have been anti-war commentators. I grew up during the Vietnam War, anti-war movement. I was coming of age. I was in the draft, so I was really keenly aware. I was, just coming out of high school in 1971 at the height of the Vietnam War, so I know what that looked like. I know when we walked out of our high school and we had demonstrations and whatnot. There's been nothing like that in Iraq. College campuses, which should be the seedbeds of any kind of anti-war movement, very quiet. So, I have a motto as a newsman, which is that sometimes the news is in the noise. It's in what everyone is screaming, yelling, and shouting. And sometimes the news is in the silence. It's in what isn't being said. And actually, the greatest skill you can develop as a news person is to learn how to listen to the silence. Because sometimes that's where the real story is. And the real story in America up to now has actually been the silence and not the protest. So then you have to work backwards. You have to ask why. Why is that? Why has this not generated more of a, really mass movement? Now, part of the answer has to do with a peculiar feature that we have an all-volunteer army today. So we have an all-volunteer army under an elected political leadership. That means everyone who's gone to Iraq volunteered to join the armed forces and to follow the decision of the elected leadership. During Vietnam, we had a draft. And so you had a lot of people, in effect, forced to be there against their will. And that's a big part of this story. Had there been a draft now, there's a real question whether we would have gone to Iraq or we'd have stayed there as long as we are, there wouldn't be more mass protests. The other reason, though, has to do with 9/11. And 9/11 distorted our politics, affected, reshaped American politics. I guess if I were to sum up my own gut feeling about the gut feeling of Americans about Iraq right now, many people oppose the war for reasons you've all discussed here, so it's not like America is uniform on this at all. But if you say, well, what is that gut? What's the gut feeling? I would summarize it like this, that I think America for 50 years, that we treated the Arab world and viewed the Arab world as a collection of big gas stations. That's all we did. And all we said was to the Arab world, the kings and dictators there, we said, you know what, guys? If you'll just keep your pumps open, your prices low, and be nice to Israel, you can do whatever you want out back. You can treat your women however you want. You can preach whatever intolerance you want from your houses of worship. You can teach whatever intolerance you want toward other religions and ethnic groups in your schools. And you can print whatever conspiracy theories you want in your newspapers. Just keep the pump open, the price low, and be nice to Israel. On 9/11, we got hit with the distilled essence of everything going on out back. And so if you want to know what is the gut underlying mood of the American people about this war, it's fool me once, shame on you. But fool me twice, shame on me. So what you saw in the Gulf War in 1991 was the status quo side of American power. It was the old Cold War we went to Kuwait to restore a medieval emir who kept the pumps open and the price low. That's why we went in 1991. An emir who got married once a week. That was the status quo side of American power. But American power's always had two sides, status quo side and a revolutionary side. And what you're seeing in Iraq now is the revolutionary side of American power. We have come there to upset what was going on out back, okay? Because we have understood that what was going on out back is lethal to us. Now, I happen to believe that context matters. The context within which people live their lives, plan their futures, and realize or don't realize their aspirations really matters. You're from India. Well, you know, it's an interesting question. Why are there no Indian Muslims in Guantanamo Bay? Why have we not seen any Indian Muslim suicide bombers? I don't know. But could it be, could it maybe be because the president of India today is a Muslim? Or was a Muslim? Could it be? I don't know. Could it be because there are Indian Muslim women on the Indian Supreme Court? Could it be because the richest man in India today is a Muslim software entrepreneur, Azim Premji, the chairman of Wipro? Could it be because when I was in India after we invaded Afghanistan, there was a debate live on Indian national TV between, is it Azmi Shaban, the movie star, the Muslim woman movie star? Shaban Azmi, I was mixed her name, Shaban Azmi, and the leading imam of New Delhi who called on Indian Muslims to rise up and join the jihad in Afghanistan against America, and live on Indian TV, the country's most popular movie star, an Indian Muslim woman, told him to shove it, basically, because she lived in a context that empowered and protected her to do so. So I think context matters. And you know what? Give me a context where young people can start any company they want, become the richest person in their country, whether they're a Hindu or Muslim, a Christian, a Jew, a Turk, or whatever. Give me a context where people, if they have a dispute, can have it adjudicated in a court of law without bribing the judge with a goat. Give me a context where if I want to run for office, no matter who I am, I can, and I can vote that government out of office. And if I want to write an op-ed piece, I can. Give me a context, even a messy one like India. Guess what? Young people don't want to blow up the world. They want to be part of it. So you'll pardon me for wanting and believing that Arabs can enjoy a similar context. I'm not as smart as Francois Mitterrand and Bob Fisk. I don't know for sure that democracy can never come to the Arab world. I'm guilty of really naive thinking, really stupid, naive American thinking that Arabs can also shape their own context if they're given a chance. And if they shape one of free markets and free people, guess what? They might not want to blow up the world. They might want to be part of it.
We'll have Minnie and Iftika. But I also, by the way, I hope you'll answer the question that Tom posed at the very beginning. What kind of America do you want to see? A strong America? A weak America? Do you want to see an America engage with Asia? Disengage from Asia? This is the question he posed at the very beginning. I hope you give him some kind of answer so he can, maybe when he goes back and speaks to an American audience of students, he can say, guess what? I was in Singapore and this is what the students told me. So give him some answers to bring back.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Minnie from India. I'm a MBA come to the first question that you posed to us about the response to the hurricane.
Yes.
Now, and also to the question that the dean has now posed once again to us. Now, America has been a role model for the rest of the world for a very long time now. And we've been used to looking up to the USA for setting up norms of behavior, of human rights, of selfhood, of all these things. And if you will pardon me for using a very strong word, the demonization of America happened when America invaded Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, we've watched in horrified amazement, and we've really been horrified at the way the so-called protector of human rights, civil liberties, has actually gone into another land and done gone very different from what they have always professed. The hurricane, in fact, is the full circle come again. It is the humanization of America. At least that is how I perceived it. In my country, we've been used to handling natural disasters for years after years. People have died. People have just pulled up their socks, gone back to work, and started to build their lives again. Now, this is the first time we've seen America faltering in the face of natural disaster, So I think this is the humanization of America back. So welcome to the real world, Because I'd just like to add, natural disasters are so wide in their scope, precisely because everything that can fail, fails. Right. There's no way you can quantify things and say, okay, this is what happens and this is what I'll do. And so I think this is the response that we've seen to the Katrina is what makes America a part of the world. I'd like you to comment on that.
That's fascinating. I'm just writing all that down.
This is a next column.
That's so beautifully said. I really appreciate it. I think there's a lot, right about what you say, and going back to all the comments, if you know anything about what I've been writing, what I wrote before the war, during and after, I'm deeply pained by how we conducted this war. I support the idea of using American power to try to collaborate with people in the Arab Muslim world who want to produce a different kind of governance from dictators and whatnot. But I'm deeply pained at how we did this, and I agree that we've paid an enormous price for this, much more than our president has any clue about. And that's just in the act, and then how poorly we did. It's one thing to take on an initiative like this on your own, but if you do it, you damn well better do it absolutely right. And we didn't do that either. So that said, I know that demonization is there because I travel the world and I feel it and I hear it, and it pains me a lot. If the hurricane will humanize us in people's eyes, I guess that would be a good thing. But I go back to the demonization a second. Part of the demonization comes from the fact that the Pakistani ambassador to Washington said something to me about 3 years ago that was a real insight. We were just talking about America and the world, and really just in passing, he said, do you know that America actually touches my life more than my own government? I thought about that a lot, and I think one of the reasons for the demonization, besides we have a president, who I think does not connect with the world in a lot of ways, and they've undertaken an action in Iraq that shocked, people in a lot of ways, some legitimate, some illegitimate, is the fact, though, that after the Cold War, one of the things that happened was that America stood astride the world with so much more economic and military power than anybody else, that a lot of people said, you know what, your government actually touches my life by what it does, culturally, economically, militarily, in some ways more than my own government. And therefore, you know what, I want to vote in your power. And I think the first symbol of the world saying that was actually the Seattle anti-globalization protest, which was around the issue of trade. And it was really, I think, kind of the world saying, you're touching my life economically now, in a world without walls, post-Cold War world, more than my own government. Therefore, I want to write the rules. I want to have a vote, in how and what you can do. We, at that time, we were like Puff the Magic Dragon, okay? A kind of big, friendly dragon, breathing a little bit of smoke, who touched people's lives culturally and economically. Then came 9/11. Then Puff the Magic Dragon turned into Godzilla with an arrow in his shoulder, with his tail sweeping wildly around. And then people said, whoa, wait a minute. Now you're touching my life militarily, and politically. And I believe the debate at the UN about the Iraq War was really a surrogate debate about America's power in the world. It was really the world saying, you have so much power, relative to the rest of the world, that we want to vote, and how your power is exercised. And I've always felt the Iraq War, was a surrogate for that. And so what I'm trying to suggest is that this demonization, in fact, of why people hate us, is partly due to what we do with our power, and what we've done in Iraq, in Afghanistan, how we've done it, okay? And there's just no denying that. But it's also the problem of what Joe Jaffe calls Mr. Big, okay? Nobody ever likes Mr. Big, basically. There's the big guy on the block or the big girl on the block is always going to generate a certain amount of resentment. It's just in the nature of things. And I think the thing we have to sort out as a country is what is the antipathy we generate just as Mr. Big? And China is going to generate this, over time. Believe me, it's not such a problem China is going to escape. China is very lucky that we're now the world's Mr. Big, but that will change. And then China will have the Mr. Big problem. I just give you a tiny example. Google, has emerged as the biggest search engine in the world. And Google, I think, is a wonderful company. I happen to know some of the people involved in it. Great, great company. But they've become really, really big. And no reason you would have noticed this story, but 3 weeks ago, there was actually a controversial story in the tech world. There's an online tech magazine called CNET, cnet.com. And cnet.com did a story about Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google. And what they did was they Googled him. They used Google in order to get all this personal, private information, where he lives, how much he makes, what his kids do. I mean, just most intimate, private details in his life. And Google got really mad, and they said, we're not going to talk to CNET for 1 year because we're Google. I looked at that. Through a friend, I immediately sent him an email. I said, Eric, you don't want to go there. That's the Mr. Big problem. Okay, Google, China is to America what Google is to Microsoft, all right? Microsoft is Mr. Big in the technology world. And the whole technology world is everybody against Microsoft. But suddenly Google now is rising up, and then one day they cross the threshold where they start to say, we're big, we'll use our power. And my advice to China is study the Google CNET story. Because one day, somewhere, China will say, wait a minute, we're China. And they're going to cross a line, and everyone's going to say, Mr. Big suddenly changed hats. And then I think maybe people out here will appreciate more that the demonization of America is definitely about some things we have done, and there's just no denying it. But part of it is inherent in being Mr. Big.
Okay, Iftika. And then Nadeem, Sani.
From Pakistan and JP student. And I want to just make a few points.
Please.
Like if you were talking about the facts, 9/11 facts are still suspectable. It is not very much clear, the investigations about 9/11 attack. And
what facts are not clear?
Let me tell you. What we have heard on the CNN, that from 19 of the attackers, 14 were the descendants of Saudi descendants. They have nothing to do with Iraq. So why Iraq, why not Saudi Arabia? This is the question.
That's certainly a good question.
Second question is who portrayed this context about which you were talking? The context of fundamentalism from where the suicide bombers are emerging. Who portrayed this context? And if we see in the Cold War era, it was the US, it was the America who was propagating the anti-communist propaganda, and the most effective tool was the religious fundamentalism to fight with the communism.
Right.
So this religious fundamentalism was propagated by the US with the help of Saudi governments, Khalij governments, Gulf governments.
Right.
And that was what we suffered in Pakistan.
Yes.
Nobody, let me tell you another fact. Before 1974, in Pakistan, the hijab, Muslim women use.
Yes.
Nobody can tell me that he or she ever had seen a hijab wearing woman in Pakistan.
Yes.
But now you go in Lahore, Karachi and Islamabad, everywhere you will see the women wearing hijab.
Yeah.
Who brought this fundamentalism to Pakistan?
Yeah.
Let me point out another thing. Reportedly, there are 8 suicides per day average in Pakistan. Reportedly.
8 suicides per day?
8 suicides per day.
You mean political ones or just personal people?
No, it is somewhat relevant with the unemployment and poverty. Okay, there are 52 reported rapes per day average in Pakistan. 52 average rapes per day. America has nothing to do with these figures, but there was a woman named Mukhtara Mai. She was raped in a village, and that case was discussed in the American Congress.
Yes.
Okay. One woman was raped, and she was discussed in the Congress. But our elected president, Mr. Bhutto,
Yes.
he was hanged, and America did nothing. America is supporting coup in Pakistan. America supported the coup of General Ayub Khan. America is supporting the coup of Pervez Musharraf. And still America is supporting the dictatorships. America engineered the Chile coup. America engineered the 1953 Dr. Mazdak Iran coup. And still America supporting the dictatorships and autocracies in the Gulf. So why not democracy there? Why not democracy in Pakistan? And if you say the referendum held by the Pervez Musharraf, so that referendum, everybody knows what is, that referendum was totally engineered.
Right.
So what you will see?
Okay, you met your match.
Next question. No. Quite serious. It's a very good question. I'm going to try to break your question down into 3 parts. Okay? Kind of the why not democracy, why Iraq not somewhere else, because the suicide bombers were there. And first of all, I happen to agree with every fact that you cited. Okay? So why, and then kind of the Pakistan dimension, and then maybe a broader question. On Pakistan, you know, I'm honored to be on the Pulitzer Prize board now in America. And the book that won last year was a book called Ghost Wars by Steve Call, which, if you haven't read it, is an incredible one for nonfiction, an incredible study of the whole U.S. relationship with Pakistan, Afghanistan, and then ultimately Al-Qaeda. And I only have one thing to say to you as an American. It's a shameful story. It's a shameful story. And we do bear real responsibility for kind of using Pakistan, opening the way for this fundamentalist wave, then basically going home. And so I have nothing to say to you other than I totally agree it's a shameful story. And one of the things I've written about in my own column is, geez, why is it that when Pakistan has had free and fair elections, these Islamic fundamentalist parties never get more than 5%. But every time it has a phony election, they get, you know, well over 5%. Of course, a lot of it's just protest vote against the status quo. So, number one, I couldn't agree with you more, and it pains me as someone who covers the world that we've played that role, and it's a really destructive role. let's take then why Iraq and not Pakistan? And this is part of my answer, would be, and this is not, I'm not a representative of the U.S. government, I'm just, telling you what my feelings are, which is there's only one reason we went to Iraq, and this is purely cynical, because we could. Okay? Because there was a context of illegitimacy and breaking of UN resolutions that created at least the shreds of a political cover to do this. That's the only justifiable reason. We should have gone to Saudi Arabia by all rights, but we went to Iraq because we could. Okay, no way to dress that up or pretty it up. Now, what I would say to you about that, though, is simply, to me, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good, which is, to me, it is not an argument at the end of the day. If you care about the issues, which I think you care about, of giving power to people to shape their own future, the fact that we did Iraq and not Saudi Arabia, that's not a bad thing to me. Okay, I mean, that's not an argument for not doing it. It's an argument for inconsistency, but it's not an argument against promoting change. Okay, if we started in Iraq and we did it simply because we could, that's not an argument in my book against doing it. Let me end, though, with a larger point, because again, I so much agree with you about our involvement in Pakistan, what a debilitating and negative thing it's been for Pakistanis. But one thing, I guess, that I would ask you is, there is a view sometimes that we are the only subjects in the world, and you are all objects. Okay? And everything that happens in the world, good and mostly bad, is because we, the subject, have acted on you, the object. All right? So if women have turned to the hijab in Pakistan, it's because of something we did. Okay? And as I said, there's no question to me that we opened the way. We used our power in a very cynical way to open the way for Wahhabi influences into these societies that were not organically there. But because I respect you as someone who's not just an object, but also a subject, who has the ability to shape your future, what I'd ask you is, what was it about Pakistan, what was going on inside of Pakistan, that's also, because there have been non-democratic governments in Pakistan on and off since the country was founded, long before we discovered Pakistan and needed to use it for the Afghanistan war. So where does our subjecthood stop, and where does your subjecthood start? In other words, and I ask this because I want to understand it, I'm ready to concede we played a really negative role, but what hasn't been happening in your society that's also opened the way for this to emerge? I want to understand that myself, both in terms of how to shape it in a different way, but I don't think you want to see yourself as totally an object that is shaped entirely by what we, the subject, have done, that you're the subjects of your own society also. And my question is really sort of what's been going on in Pakistan that also made this movement so easily take hold in ways that it might not have otherwise. So that's would be my response. But thank you for your question.
Okay, we have Sunny, Scott, and then Lan. Okay.
Sir, my name is Sunny. I'm from India. I'm studying the MPP course. I have two short questions. One, why is America trying to spread democracy all over the world? And two, what will be America's role in reforming the United Nations?
Well, John Bolton's there now. I'm sure it's we had a civil war in our country, as you know, 150 odd years ago. And President Lincoln was president, and we had our Civil War. And President Lincoln is now remembered as, certainly in any listing of greatest Americans, let alone greatest American presidents, he's remembered as certainly one of the top 5. But if you actually study Lincoln in the Civil War, and how he decided actually to go to war against the South, do you know what his reasons were initially? It had nothing to do with slaves. It had nothing to do with the fact that the South believed that white people were entitled to enslave black people. Lincoln justified going into the war entirely to preserve the Union. It was all about simply preserving the political integrity of the federal United States. It had nothing to do with slavery. And then 9/11 happened. It was called Gettysburg. And it was in the Gettysburg Address that for the first time, Abraham Lincoln completely redefined the reasons for the Civil War. And it was about human dignity and freedom. We decided to go to war in Iraq over WMD. It had nothing to do, George Bush did not care about the democracy of the Iraqi people and the democratization of the Iraqi people. But I would argue that 9/11, I mean, it was always the second reason. But it became the first reason, in part for purely cynical reasons, because there was no WMD there. Well, if there's no WMD there, then why are you there? That was the reason, you justified the war. But actually, I would argue that for most Americans, the reason, I really felt this in visiting with our troops in Afghanistan, it was the second reason in their gut was actually the more important. It was an intuitive sense that until and unless these societies are open and free and young people can realize their aspirations, that in a flat world, we're going to somehow be in danger as Mr. Big, as the country that's seen as responsible for everything, including the weather. Okay? And so we've seen this kind of transition before in our history, where a president starts a war for one reason, purely realpolitik, cold-blooded, keep the republic together. And then suddenly, something happens at Gettysburg and 9/11 that says, you know what, something else is important here. I don't think we should be on a crusade for democracy around the world. I think we should be helping other people help themselves where we can. I think Iraq, I can guarantee you one thing, if you're all worried about it, we ain't doing that again. Not real soon. Okay. So I think people understand. I mean, not real soon. I mean, not for another generation until they forget about this, what this generation learned. So you don't have to worry about that. But I'm going to just say one thing. This is something Kishore and I have talked about. Right now, you're experiencing a world with too much American power. That's kind of an undertow of a lot of the questions here. God save you from a world with too little American power. You might want to think about that.
Well, UN reform.
UN reform. It's an interesting time to ask that question. Kofi Annan's in real trouble, Kojo was up to some bad stuff there while Dad wasn't looking. You really need to ask the Dean about that. I'm not trying to, but I don't know enough about what needs to be reformed at the UN. I really dislike those in my own society who are always, they talk about the UN as if it's something that came from Mars, was planted there on 41st and 1st Avenue, and who are they? Where did this thing come from? And they don't even speak English there, and there's this view that it's some alien foreign spaceship that came down. The UN is us. It's us. It's what we make of it. It's what we choose to make of it. And what I've always thought is insane about the kind of anti-UN forces in America is that it's the greatest amplifier of American power that there possibly could be. When we get the UN to prove what we want to do, it's a huge legitimating and legitimate amplifier of U.S. power. So, to me, that seems what ails the UN right now is really stuff that you're studying in this school. It's really administrative, public policy. People, acting in their jobs responsibly and in a non-corrupt manner. But on the meta issue, with or kind of the UN, that's really what we decide to make of it. And as a country that has the biggest vote and the biggest budget there, it seems to me we should decide to make a lot of it, and not a little of it. That's kind of my take.
Okay, Sunny, and then Lam, and then we may have to close shop at 1:30.
My My name is Wu Fei. I come from China and also the junior MPP student here. I have a question about the September 11 because I think September 11 is one of the most important incidents in the 21st century. So when I first look at the picture in the TV about September 11, I also be shocked. So I want to know, from your point of view as a common citizen of America, what's the reason why U.S. being attacked? Because
that's a good question.
Because I think it's very important for us to understand it. Otherwise, we will be puzzled.
Right.
Because you are the Mr. Big in the world, or because they are the evil, you are the right, or do you do something wrong, or do you do something affect?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
That's a very good question. And like any big event like this, there is no single explanation, I don't think. You know, my own feeling is that 9/11 was really part of a Muslim-Muslim civil war. That is, Osama bin Laden, his real objective is not to rule America, not to rule Washington, D.C. It's to rule Saudi Arabia and control the holy places of Islam in Saudi Arabia. That's his real objective. Remember, he comes from the wealthiest non-royal family in Saudi Arabia. Okay, so his agenda is really with Saudi Arabia. And I believe that basically what their goal was and remains is that where they see the United States, where they oppose the United States in most tactical purposes, that they see us as the prop of Saudi Arabia. So why bother attacking Saudi? Let's go right for the prop, you know. That's one level of this. So there's a real intra-Saudi civil war going on here. That's what's going on in Saudi Arabia this week in Dammam. You see it continuing. It's now coming really out in the open. The Saudi regime is now in an open, I don't want to call it civil war, but it's a real struggle inside against these jihadi forces within its own breast. Okay, and 9/11 was part, it seems to me, of that story. And I would kind of locate it there. But at the same time, to me, you know, bin Laden and his type, I see them more as what I would call Islamo-Leninists, because I put them in the same kind of, these are people, I don't see them as a religious movement. I see them as more of a political movement. I think these are people who really stripped Islam of its religious content and really turned it into a political ideology the way the SDS did, or the Weather Underground, or the Red Brigades, or the any of these utopian kind of Leninist Trotskyite movements. Now, one of the things that these movements all believe is that the masses are inert. Okay, and in this sense, they're Leninists. And what they need is a big dramatic event. If we do this big dramatic event, the masses will then rise up and catalyze us, you know, and basically, you know, join and follow us, etc. There's something very utopian in the Trotskyite Leninist mode of 9/11. That's why I put bin Laden, to me, he's Che Guevara with a keffiyeh. Because there have been non-democratic governments. He's Sheikh Guevara, okay? He's in that same sort of political mode, I would argue. So that's at the second level. But at the third level, there is the Mr. Big problem. Because you really have to ask, why did a lot of people around the world say quietly, America got its comeuppance, you know? And what they resonated and triggered was the resentment, more broadly and generally, of Mr. Big and the popularity of somebody giving Mr. Big a punch in the nose. So I think it was kind of all those things wrapped up together, and that's where I kind of located.
Okay, we'll take maybe two quick questions, Lan and Uttam, and then we will close shop if you don't mind. Sorry.
Good morning, my name is Lan. I'm from Vietnam. Yeah, you know, during this time last year, most of Vietnamese people in our country felt very disappointed and upset. Do you know why?
No.
Yeah, I'm sure that many of you may know about the consequence of the Vietnam War. That is the Agent Orange. Mm-hmm. Yes, during this time last year, we sued against 30 companies in America to compensate for the consequence, the influence of the bad influence of the Agent Orange, and at that time we were very optimistic about the result, but at the end we failed at this suit. So, what do you think about the reasons for the failure of our country to suit against the 30 companies? Is there any implication behind the reason? I wonder whether America ignore this consequence because America doesn't want to admit the ever great failure during the Vietnam War, and if we want to suit again, is it possible for us to be successful, and how can we successful on the road to claim back the fairness? So thank you.
I don't want to avoid your question, but you're right. I didn't know what was going on a year ago, and I still don't, and so I'm not aware of this suit and the issues around it. So I don't want to give you an unintelligent answer. I'm just not aware of the details. I apologize, but I'm not. I'm up on a lot of things, but I was not up on.
Frankly speaking, I think that you should know about this because at that time.
I'm sure you do.
Now he knows.
You've definitely put it on my radar screen. But I just don't want to give you an answer.
We have to finish because he has a very busy afternoon. But Uttam, and maybe Phong, if you can make it very short questions.
I just want to supplement Lan's idea because it's explaining my question also about the orange agent. Because I just put it this way so you may know more about the context. Yeah. That I think in 1979 or 1982, the former soldier in America was compensated by the 30 companies already. Oh. So the former soldier in American.
I see. So why can't Vietnamese be compensated as well? Is that the issue?
I think so because we have more than 30 million affected for many generations until now. Yeah. Let alone not mention the environmental factor yet. So if you don't know exactly about the suit, so you can raise the voice as the American ordinary.
Well, you've sensitized me to it now. I appreciate it.
Okay. Yeah. Because we have received many and more people from American to support it as a suit, but still we failed. So.
Okay. Well, you've done a good job, and seriously, I'm glad the best reason for me to travel is to go.
Our suit has not finished, so just happy to receive your support.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Uttam, last quick question.
Uttam, you're last. It better be good, pal. So.
That would be the most brilliant question.
Thank you, sir. Well, my question is slightly, permit me to move away from the frame.
Permit you? Go right ahead.
My question is, my perception is the whole problem, what we are facing in the world, is because of the lack of appreciation and connectivity we lack of the real situations or about the common people on the real streets. Mm-hmm. There are three key people who, are players in this problem solving in any world situations. One is the politician, second is the journalist, and third are people like us who are public policy experts. Now, in this world, the politicians are increasingly representing power blocks due to decreasing participation rates, especially in democracies. My short question here is, does decreasing participation rates in democracies is a result of somewhere globalization? Second thing is, journalists somehow fail in probably not reporting, as you said, the silence. And third is, public policy government servants like us also are not able to connect themselves with the real people. my question is there any smart way to connect to the masses and understand the world better? Thank you.
I want to hear the answer to this.
Well, I say to Tom, don't worry, because health is on the way. Okay? And it's the flattening of the world. Now, I'm going to talk about this more tonight, but let me just take up your second point in particular, which is that the BBC, on the day after 7/7, the subway bombings in London, immigrant bombing in London, received over 20,000 blogged eyewitness reports and pieces of video and still pictures. In other words, people, individuals, were not waiting to download their news from the BBC. They were uploading their own news to the BBC. Now, a friend of mine is running to actually today's, I think, for a job we have in New York City called public advocate. And it's like the ombudsman for the city. And his whole campaign actually is built around what I think is going to be the new politics, which is empowering individuals to shape their own governance. Now, I'll give you one example. One of his proposals is there's a phone number in New York City called 311, not 911 for emergency, but 311 for problems. Now, what he's proposing is a system be set up. You're walking down the street in Tom's neighborhood, you see a big pothole. You take a picture of it with your cell phone, locate it on your Google map, and email it to 311. I expect government to have this pothole fixed, okay, by next week. No one can say, we're public officials, we didn't know that people had a pothole. So we're entering a world, and I'm going to talk about this later this afternoon, where if you are, in your career, end up as a public policy person, you are going to be, in your lifetime, you grew up in a society where people who were in jobs that you would aspire to, they got to download everything. I'll download, fixing that pothole. I'll download these regulations. But you're about to enter a world where more and more of your citizens every day are going to be able to upload. And your ability to sort of ignore their problems, okay, because they're going to be able to upload, is going to be a really interesting challenge for every public policy official. The ability to say, I didn't know that pothole was there, or my inability to say, do you realize what's going on in my neighborhood? That's really about to change. And in your career as a public policy official, your biggest challenge is going to be sifting out and dealing with all of the issues that are going to be uploaded at you by individual citizens, not sitting in a smoke-filled room with a few colleagues and deciding what you're going to download onto them.
I think you will all agree that we at the school have been very privileged to have Tom privately speak to us. I can tell you that people all over the world would pay thousands to have this privilege that you've had. I hope you'll now join me in thanking Tom. You'll hear him again this afternoon, but just one word of peace. As you know, the auditorium can only take 400, and we have encouraged the students, as you know, to stay in another room to let other members of the public into the auditorium to listen to Tom today. But your questions can be sent to Tom, by the way. I hope you spend the whole afternoon thinking of good questions. The questions will come to me as chairman, and if they're good questions, I will post them to him again this afternoon. So with that, I hope you join me in thanking Tom. We have a very busy afternoon. Can I invite the faculty up now, quickly, because Tom is going to be the Prime Minister later.